Hi there. Welcome to Game of Her Own, a podcast about women who work in sports. I'm your host, Jahaan Blake. I bring you stories of women who are game changers, incredible leaders, and trailblazers in the sports industry. You will get a behind-the-scenes look of how they navigated their journey, valuable lessons they learned along the way, and advice for high-achieving women just like you. I'm excited you're here. Let's do this. My next guest is intentional about living outside of her comfort zone. It's how she's held major roles at some of the world's biggest events like Super Bowl and the Olympics. Ellie Kiel has had a love for sports since she was 5 when she followed her dad around for 18 holes while he was working golf tournaments. It was a snowboarding trip at the age of 16 that helped her realize that she wanted a career in sports. Once she made the decision, she was on a mission to make it happen, and Ellie hasn't looked back since. Listen in as Ellie talks about her career in sports as an independent contractor and how she took a job with the Miami Super Bowl host committee as the vice president of the volunteer program and event strategy. Ellie, welcome to the Game of Her Own podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me today.
Take us back in time. Tell everybody when you first fell in love with sports.
Well, I enjoy playing sports more than I enjoy watching them, and that's how I got into it when I was very little. I played baseball on the boys' baseball team, soccer, volleyball. I took golf lessons, any sport, name it, I've played it, and that's how I got into sports from the very beginning. I remember when I played t-ball when I was in kindergarten, and it kind of just took off from there. And my dad played hockey at Ohio State, so he was very involved in sports his whole life as well. And so I think from him, I got involved at a very young age, and he was still active as a dad, and he used to volunteer at different golf events down in Florida and in Minnesota. And so I remember walking 18 holes with him, watching him as he volunteered when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. So I was into that big event industry and saw what a golf tournament looked like at a very young age.
I'm sorry, you walked 18 holes as a 5-year-old?
Yes, my dad would have great golfers like Ernie Els or Tiger Woods, Greg Norman. And so my mom and I would follow him around while he worked.
That's amazing. I mean, any other 5-year-old would be like, I'm going home. Like, this is boring. Like after like the first hole, like 18 holes, and during like a tournament, that's a lot.
It was always exciting.
So you probably just didn't want to go home when it was all over. You were probably sad.
Probably by Sunday at the end, I was like,
So you also played on an all-boys team?
In 2nd grade and 3rd grade, I was the only girl on the baseball team.
Wow. Did you realize like that was a big deal, or did you think it was like, whatever, I'm just playing sports. I'm doing what I love?
I didn't think it was that big of a deal because growing up in the neighborhood, I'd always play baseball in my backyard, and I could always compete with them. Most of the time I was better than a lot of the boys, and so I never thought it was that big of a deal until, then I was the only one out there with a ponytail. But again, I was, 2nd, 3rd grade. I didn't think much of it.
I love it. So talk to me, what was your favorite sport?
My favorite sport was baseball. In 4th grade, then I changed to fast pitch softball. So then I was with all the girls, but I was always the youngest one on my team. The smallest one. If I was 4th grade, I was playing with 6th graders or 7th graders. I think really playing with the boys to give me that leg up.
You did not become a professional athlete.
No, I did not.
Like we all hoped we would. But for me, it was I wanted to be Mia Hamm, but that didn't happen either. So how did you make that transition from playing sports to realizing, okay, I want to work in sports?
Well, I always thought I really got into skiing and snowboarding as well. And so my first trip out to Colorado, I was in 10th grade. And so I went skiing out there with a church trip, and I realized, wow, this would be so neat to run a ski resort someday. And so it was still active. It wasn't as competitive. It was more, for pleasure, but there was some competition as well. And so when I realized that, I was like, okay, well, if I want to be in the sports industry and be around skiing, how can I do that? Well, first, I need to move to Colorado. So I thought, okay, I need to go to college in Colorado. So that next year, my dad and I looked at different schools. We looked at 2 or 3 schools in Colorado. I found the one that I wanted to go to. And then once I got to Colorado, went to school there, I figured, okay, who do I need to work for to run a ski resort? Well, Vail Resorts was the biggest ski resort out there. So then my junior year, I got an internship with Vail Resorts. I took a semester off and moved to Breckenridge, where I did a 4-month-long internship up there. And so I was well on my way. So then my junior year and senior year, when I started applying for jobs, I only applied in what I majored in, which was HR, and at different Vail Resorts properties. And so my first job out of college was at the Vail Marriott, obviously in Vail, Colorado. So I was able to be around in that ski industry and work and be able to do what I love, as well as still be involved with sports. But that wasn't enough for me. And while I was doing HR, I still wanted to be more involved with events around skiing. And so I moved from the hospitality and hotel industry over to a nonprofit in Colorado that ran all of the events that happened in Vail. And so I started working on international ski competitions, bike races, marathons, kayak races. So I was able to move and get very close into the competitiveness of the sports that I loved.
Okay, so what age, let's go back real quick. How old were you when the ski trip happened, the church one?
I was 16.
At 16, you went on a trip. Clearly it was life-changing, right? And you came home and you decided, okay, this is what I want to do. How, at 16, how did you become so disciplined to like put that plan together and then go after it?
Well, I've always been very, very determined. And I started snowboarding when I was 10 years old. And so it's always been a hobby of mine, just like softball or volleyball. But I realized that snowboarding was a lifelong sport that I could do because you didn't have to be on a team. You could enjoy it for the rest of your life. And so besides baseball, that was my favorite thing to do was snowboard. I became better and better at it. And so my first trip, I went to Michigan in 8th grade. In 9th grade, I went to Montana. And then 10th grade is when I went to Colorado. And that's where I was really felt at home. And with everyone, we had, the people that we met there just had the same interests as I did. And I loved the atmosphere and just the environment in Colorado. And with snowboarding and skiing, just how the lifestyle was. And so I realized, all right, I could see myself doing this for a long time. Once I determine something, once I make my mind up about something, I'm very determined and was able to set goals in order to make that happen.
As someone who knows you really well, that is very true. It could be no matter how big or how small, once you decide you want to do something, even like getting coffee, you're going to make it happen with me. There is no saying no to Ellie. I love that. So you 100% just listened to your passion and listened to your gut really on what made you happy.
Exactly. And so obviously there's, definitely bumps in the road. You're like, financially you're living 3,000 miles from home, but you have to, sacrifice certain things and really get out of your shell. And so that's something that I really learned as I, went to school out of state. No one from my high school went there. So I really went out of my bubble. And that's where my success happened when I got out of my comfort level.
So your growth really just happens when you stepped outside of your comfort zone. You were thrown into the fire and you thrived.
Exactly.
I know what your last role was, and you have a unique career journey, right? Different from some of the other people that I've interviewed on this podcast. You do a lot of contract work, if you will. Is that right?
Lots of contract work.
So talk about your last position, like what your title was and what you did.
Yeah, so my last position was the vice president of the volunteer program for the Miami Super Bowl host committee. So I was in charge of recruiting, training, scheduling, and setting up the program for 10,000 volunteers that volunteered for a week-long events around the Super Bowl in Miami.
Wow. So vice president level, dealing with Super Bowl. That's intense. That's a big job.
It was a big job. And what really helped me is that it was my third time on a Super Bowl team that really helped me thrive and be able to make it to that level.
how'd you get your foot in the door when it came to Super Bowl and NFL? And I know a little bit about your journey, but I wanted to share it with everybody else. So talk about your journey on how you first started in the NFL or the host committee, and then how you got to where you are.
Everything has happened based on, who you know versus what you know. And that's what I've really learned. It's that it's all about relationships and working hard and proving that you should be there once you do get there. And so once I started working on those international ski competitions in Colorado, I really found that I loved working with volunteers and with people and training and making sure that the event ran smoothly. And so once I did an event with 500 volunteers, then up to 2,500 volunteers, I thought I could picture myself doing this for the rest of my life, but I want to do it bigger and better. And so that's when I looked, well, what's bigger than the Super Bowl besides the Olympics? And so I applied for a job in San Francisco. I had never been to San Francisco before. So I applied for a volunteer manager position in San Francisco for Super Bowl 50. And so I had applied on LinkedIn. And then once I told my coworkers I had applied, one of my coworkers said, hey, I know someone who works on Super Bowls. He sets up the stadium campus. I'll put in a word to him to see if he knows anyone on the host committee. And so after I had my first interview, my coworker came back to me and said, hey, I did find someone who knows someone at the host committee. I'm going to recommend you, but if I do recommend you and you get the job, you have to take it. So do you want me to recommend you? And here I am in this small ski town of 4,000 people. And I'm like, I've never been to San Francisco, but sure, why not? If you recommend me and I get it, I'll take it. That's exactly what happened. He recommended me. That got my extra foot in the door, and I was on my way to San Francisco.
Wow. Why did he tell you had to take it?
He had also worked for this other company that was connected with the Super Bowl, and he didn't want to put my name out there and put his name on the line if I was just going to say no to it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you had a full-time salary job.
Yes.
Wow. And so then you took on a role of manager of volunteers. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a contract position.
Contract position. It was about a 10-month contract. So I picked up all my stuff and moved to San Francisco. Again, I didn't know anyone, but I knew, just like how I'd moved to Colorado, didn't know a soul. I was going out of my comfort zone. And that's what I did when I moved to San Francisco. When I was in San Francisco, it was learning, not only the city, but also this new job as well. I mean, I threw my whole life into work. So that was my number one priority when I was there. I worked about 6 days a week, and I told my boss's boss, who was the VP of operations at the time for the Super Bowl, that I wanted to learn as much as I could during my 10 months there. And he said, of course. He turned into my mentor. He had done probably 8 Olympics at that time, a few Super Bowls. So he was well into the event industry, specifically on these large scale events as a contractor. And so he took me under his wing, and he taught me so much. We would go to every single 49ers game, every single event that happened at the stadium. We would count how long it would take for guests to leave the parking lot after a 49ers game. So many things that weren't on my job description, but he took me under his wing to teach me the operations, transportation, so much more than just running a volunteer program.
So you took advantage of that opportunity. It was only 10 months long, and you just decided, I want to know everything about the business. Teach me what you can teach me.
Yes. And he loved that. He saw the potential in me. He saw how eager I was. There's other people obviously in our company, but they weren't as eager as me. Work was my number one priority. I wanted to make the most. Didn't know if I would ever have this opportunity again. And so that's why I really put 110% of my effort into this project.
So tell us more. So what happens after San Francisco?
So with San Francisco, I learned that 2 years later, the Super Bowl would be in Minnesota, which is where I'm originally from. And so I took it upon myself. All the host committees speak to each other the following years. And so I went to, again, my boss and said, hey, if when the Minnesota host committee comes, can I be their point of contact? Because I want to go and work there. So if they have any questions about traveling or setting up tickets or any of that, can I be their point of contact? And they're like, yep, Ellie, that's a great idea. That'd be great for you to do that. And so they introduced me to them. I answered any questions that they had. When I went home for Thanksgiving, when I went home for Christmas, I met with their CEO and their COO. And so I took time when I was living, when I was home to meet with them. And I spent 2 to 3 hours with them each time, just telling them everything that I had learned, not asking them for a job, but just showing them how invested I was and how, I would love to do that again. And I remember, after I saw them after Christmas, they said, thank you so much for coming again. And I said, I would love to come to Minnesota and run the volunteer program here. And they said, we would love to have you. And so that is what I did next. And so I had about 5 months that a little bit of downtime in between host committees. And that just happened to be the 2016 Olympic year in Brazil. And my mentor, again, the VP of operations, his name is Walt. He, like I mentioned, had worked several Olympics before. And so I told him, hey, I'm interested if you need another person to work in Brazil. And he goes, I would love to have you come to Brazil. So then he put me in contact with the company that he normally worked for. And so I signed a 5-month contract with a company called GMR to work in their office while I was still in San Francisco. And then I lived in Brazil for about 2 months during the actual Olympics. So that was a whole new experience. And instead of volunteers, I was in charge of staff. And so we were in charge of a hospitality program for Visa, where we would bring guests to and from the games, to different events, different tourist attractions, and took care of them while they were here during their stay. So that opened up just a whole nother level. And I did the exact same thing that I did at the Super Bowl, where I wanted to learn not just staffing, but I wanted to learn transportation. I wanted to learn venues. I wanted to learn all the different, VIP hospitality. This was a for-profit company. It wasn't a nonprofit. So it looked a little bit different there as well. So I was able just to learn, again, so many things that I could carry on with me to my next position.
So you set out, okay, I want to do something big. Love the ski town. I want to do something bigger than just this. What's big? Super Bowl, Olympics. Okay, I'm going after that. And you did it. So you started in San Francisco, then you went to Brazil, and then you went to Minneapolis. That sounds too good to be true. Like that's amazing. You just literally said, this is what I want to do. And you went and did it. So I have some more questions, but I want you to keep going, talking about from Brazil to Minneapolis.
So then once I got to Minneapolis, then I really start to learn, now I'm working with the same people that I did before, all the different vendors of the NFL, the people at the NFL. So you really start to, you learn the vendors, and that's how I met you. You work for a vendor of the NFL. And so you are able to make a name for yourself and get to know, because they have that familiar face from host committee to host committee, which was to my advantage. So from San Francisco Super Bowl, we had about 5,000 volunteers. And then in Minnesota, we had about 10,000. So this was definitely my biggest project that I had ever worked on. And of course, I was a little bit nervous. 10,000 people is a lot of people, but I was able to use everything that I learned in San Francisco and my previous jobs working on volunteer programs in Colorado, of what worked, what didn't work, and able to put everything that I learned to make this one the best program yet. And that's what it was. It helped that people in Minnesota are so nice and so willing to help and very just excited about and have their culture, and they have a lot of pride in Minnesota. So that helped me definitely put on the best program that the NFL had ever seen. So a lot from there as well of really, what worked and what pumped the volunteers up and what worked. My goal is always to my work, from point A to point B, how to get there in the most seamless way. And so learning that, I did a great job of making that whole program pretty seamless from A to B, from ordering uniforms, recruiting, interview all the volunteers, training, and getting them out during Super Bowl week.
I love this. So you say when you went from Brazil to Minneapolis, which just sounds really fun. But when you did that, you were a little nervous because you went from 5,000 volunteers out in San Francisco to 10,000, which is a huge number, right? It's a huge goal. So you went from 5,000 to 10,000, but you were nervous and you weren't sure if you were ready for it. So sometimes clients of mine get a little nervous and they let their nerves take over, right? And drive decisions. So how do you not let your nerves drive decisions?
I have to think of how far I have come. And so, I look back, I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know if I can be the head of this program, if I can lead this program, but I have to look back and see, I've done this before, I can do it again. And what makes me confident is that I have really great people around me. And so I will build a committee, a volunteer committee who I know as, professionals, that they will help me. And I look back, and when I'm in the room of some people, that I will work with, and I realize I have the most experience in the room. I've already done this before. I've seen 2 other Super Bowls before. So that builds my confidence, just looking back to see how far I've come.
I like that. So looking back to see how far you come, but you also surround yourself with great people to help you. You realize that you can't do this by yourself, and it's not that they're doing the work for you, but it's almost like they're helping lift you up.
Exactly. Yes. And so they asked me, hey, how did you do this in the past? What was great about it? What wasn't so great about it? How can I help you? Hey, have you thought about it this way before? And so it's just great to have, a mentor to help you with, with different questions, your committee members to bounce ideas off of to make it better. Because obviously 2, 3, 4 people are better than one. My energy that I give off, and they, like, wow, you've done so much already. It just makes me, you're right. They give me the confidence that I need.
Women who are in these new big roles, really, what would your advice to them be?
That you are there for a reason. So always to your meetings, come prepared to make sure, you're invited to the table. Now show them that you're meant to be there, that you're knowledgeable, that you've done your research, you're just as smart as the person next to you. But I would say you do have to work harder. You have to prove your worth.
And why do you say you have to work harder?
Women in the sports industry is always a challenge because we have men who've been around it forever. If you look around, all the CEOs, most of them are men, and they think sports, they know all the sports. And then once you come to the table, you also know sports, then it kind of is like, you should be here as well. And so my number one is to work harder than the person next to you and do your research over and above. I remember one of my interviews for San Francisco, I was doing all this research on the NFL players, 49ers players, different stats, all these different things that I thought I had to know. They didn't ask me one football question during my interview.
Did you feel prepared for the interview though?
I did, yes. And they asked me, questions of things that I have already done before. So everything about the volunteer program that I ran in Colorado was, the same question. How would you interview someone? What training would you train a volunteer? So luckily I had all that experience before. And so I was able to prepare for the interview, not even knowing, I just had already experience with it.
So you prepared and you wanted to learn about all the stats and all the things, and that's not what they care about. They care about your experience and what value you're going to bring to the table.
Exactly.
Working harder than everybody else. I like that, but tell people who are listening, like, okay, yes, I'm going to work harder. Wait, how do I do that? I got to do my research. What other tips would you give women? Someone like yourself went from manager to an executive pretty quickly. Right? So what things along the way did you work harder than others?
So I always came to the office before my boss, and I always left after my boss. And I think that really just showed her and also my mentor just how important this was. Oh, the thing is not due till next week. Well, I'm going to get it done today so I can focus on something else. And always, doing research. We've always done it this way. Well, I'm going to figure out how to do it another way that maybe would be more enjoyable or more efficient. And also, like I said, going to different departments and seeing what they're working on and how they do different things so you could learn. Because then pretty soon people will be asking for your opinion. Hey, we're thinking about doing it this way in transportation. What do you think about that? Mm-hmm. And so once they know that you are really committed, then they'll get you more involved. And so I was able to, they bring me on to attend and help with some of the events and do other things because they knew I was eager and I had just a good opinion and experience with other things. And so really just showing that you're engaged and you're asking good questions during your meetings and speaking up when you do have an opinion. Say, hey, at my job in Colorado, we did it this way. Have you ever thought about that? It worked really well with these 400 VIPs that we were working with. And I think too, I am not very shy. And so I have seen, a lot of girls in the industry, they'll come up to me after the meeting and I'll say, why didn't you say that during the meeting? Building up that confidence. And all it takes is one time, and if it doesn't go over well, you try it again or run over your idea before the meeting with someone and then bring it up during the meeting. Really making your way and owning that spot at the table.
That's so much good stuff there. So coming in early and staying late, right? So you're doing contract work. You live in a city where you don't really necessarily know anybody, right? So you kind of have that luxury. You don't have a family yet, but if you do, if someone's listening and they do have a family, you can be creative in how you do that. You might show up early and have to leave early, or you just log on later in the night, or you really just take advantage of the time that you have and make sure you are 100% focused at work and just putting everything you have in there. Because it sounds like that's what you did. Like when you were there, you were 100% at work.
Correct. And I would make a list of everything that I need to get done that day, and I wouldn't leave until I would get it done. And, instead of, I can do this tomorrow, that was just such a big thing for me. Another challenge is going to come tomorrow. Like I need to get this done now because another thing is going to pop up tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, the list always grows, right? And I like that you challenged when you heard the words, well, we've always done it this way. And it sounds like to me, you heard those words, but you didn't have a knee-jerk reaction to them. You went and researched and figured out some other ways to be more efficient and then presented them to your team and your boss to figure out a different way to do things. Is that right?
Right. And so that's what's great about, attending events as a spectator and not just working them and even volunteering. And so many girls or people will ask me, how do I get into the sports industry? And I always say the number one place to start is as a volunteer. Anyone can be a volunteer. When you're there, you meet people. And I have a great example of this is my now colleague. She was in grad school. She started out as an intern for me at Super Bowl 50. And then when we were done with that, I then recommended her to be a volunteer manager in Houston. And so she moved to Houston and worked on that role. And so and she started out as a volunteer to intern to coordinator and then was a manager. So the easiest way to get your foot in the door is to volunteer and to shine and ask questions and be motivated and do more.
The speaking up at meetings. I think it is difficult when people do finally get a seat at the table or women are trying to get a seat at the table. I do hear it a lot is, how do I get the confidence to speak up in meetings? And what you said is something I say all the time is just do it, practice it, try it. And if it does not land well, it doesn't work, try it again. Like just keep on trying because that's the only way you're going to become better at it. That's the only way you're going to do it really well is if you keep trying over and over again. So it sounds like to me, you've spoken up. I know that you're not shy, but there's probably times that things that you said didn't land well. And how did you recover from that?
I mean, it's always nerve-wracking when you're speaking up, when you have these CEO levels in the meeting and you say something like, oh, well, no, we don't want to do it that way. So after those meetings, I've gone to my boss and, hey, like, what do you think I could have said better? What do you think would have been a better idea? And so getting someone who's above me and who has more experience to give me feedback. And then that way I'll learn, I should have thought about that, or I should have thought about, A, B, and C, the transportation, the logistics around that idea before I said that idea. And so that's something that I'll always do is ask for feedback to learn. That's the only way that you'll learn.
So ask for feedback and don't be afraid. You're not going to get it right 100% of the time.
All comes back to that comfort zone for me. And that's where you strive and you go out of your comfort zone and you do say a great idea, and then they take that idea and they use it. And that builds my confidence and gets me that exposure.
And I would say that you're outside of your comfort zone, right? Like you're not in it, you're outside of it. I feel like you were living, and I would draw something, but no one can see this right now, but you are living constantly outside of your comfort zone and pushing yourself and asking for feedback after a meeting is a great way to learn, right? And another great way is to even just write it down. So, okay, I tried this, didn't land well. Here's why. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's the feedback I got. And it's almost like you build this little lessons learned book that you can kind of go back to, especially when you start to get nervous, because sometimes you're going to have really good wins. You should write those down too. And sometimes you're going to have a miss, but you're going to always feel prepared because you just kind of, you got it out, right? You got all the jitters out and you talk about it. It prepares you for the next time. Let's talk. We were in, I think, Minneapolis and we ended there. So then what happened next?
Then while I was in Minneapolis, and like I mentioned before, all the host committees talk to each other. And so the Miami Super Bowl host committee had come to Minnesota to check things out. And their CEO asked our CEO, who should we hire from your team? What are we missing here? What should we do? And the CEO recommended Ellie. You need Ellie on your team. And so the CEO reached out to me, met him in Minnesota. And then he said, why don't you, what do you think about Florida? It's a little bit warmer than Minnesota. Why don't you come down here and see if you like it, see if you can run our volunteer program down here. And so that's what I did. After Minnesota, I took a couple of months off, and then I moved down to Florida to hit the ground running. Again, it was out of my comfort zone. I didn't know many people in Florida. Again, I was picking up my whole life and moving down there. And that's, again, is what I saw had worked before. And so I wanted to keep riding that train, riding the Super Bowl train that I call it, is going from one place to the next, coming out of my comfort zone, but still I have experience in it, but new is a different state. It was a different city, a different culture. So even though I had done the Super Bowl volunteer program before, it was totally different down in Florida.
All these stops along your journey really prepared you to be an executive for a Super Bowl.
Yes. And that's where I knew, if I wanted to keep moving up, I needed to keep moving. I needed to keep getting out of my comfort zone, doing, striving and be able to jump. Because I see so many people who stay in one location, and it doesn't even have to be a location. It could be like one company, but you stay there and you're kind of just stagnant. And so I have learned and I've seen firsthand what it takes, different company, different role, different company, different state, different role. And that's what really helped me move up and up and up, and always show that when I'm in that role is that I'm taking full advantage. All right, Minnesota, I have 2 years. I'm going to put my best 2 years into this, and that's what helped me get Miami.
You shared a lot. You were candid. You talked about things that worked, some things that didn't work, and how you kind of bounced back. So as we come to an end, tell us, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given?
Best piece of advice I've been given is to be the most positive person that you know. That is one thing that I have always lived by, because who doesn't want to interact with someone who has a smile on their face, who's positive, who's outgoing, who makes you smile as well. And so that's something that even though, it's obviously life is difficult, work's difficult, but if you are positive about the outcome of everything, then it helps you succeed.
How do you consistently practice that?
You surround yourself with positive people.
That's good. That's really good. So now if someone wanted to talk to you or get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
The best way to get in touch with me would be via email, which is elliekehoe@gmail.com.
Okay, good. And I'll put that in the show notes too, just in case you don't know how to spell Kehoe or something like that. Awesome. Ellie, thank you so much. This was awesome. You were fantastic. I'm so glad that we got this interview done.
Me too. Good to chat with you.
What did you think of Ellie's story? She shared a lot of great lessons learned along her journey. If you were to do one thing differently after listening to today's episode, what would it be? Would it be to consistently live outside of your comfort zone? How about creating opportunities for yourself? Whatever you do, make sure you take action today to get one step closer to your goals. Your future self will thank you. Thank you for listening. I would love to stay connected with you. You can follow me on Instagram @Jahaan Blake, and don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how I can support you and your journey in the sports industry, email me at jblake@thejblakegroup.com or send me a DM on Instagram. I look forward to hearing from you.